I'm Teresa Ellerby, and I'm here today with Shane and Marilyn Duke, and we are going to just have a discussion today about some of the exciting things that they do in the service of the Lord, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys. If you'll just tell us a little bit about yourselves and how long you've been in Caldwell Parish and why we have you on our Caldwell Parish, on one of our spotlights of residents of Caldwell Parish.
Well, I was born in Columbia. My parents, our families have been here for several generations. My dad's family has. Born in the Copenhagen community, my parents were. I was born in Columbia Hospital. Grandparents, it was always kind of the place we liked the most was the Copenhagen community, I guess. It's a mixture of hills and fields. And when we'd go across the river, I would always enjoy the visits, but I'd like to come back home to the hills. But I grew up here and enjoyed it, went to school, everything I've ever known. I've never been without a Columbia, Louisiana address. And met my wife here. She was also born in Columbia. It's been a good place to live. I've enjoyed the rural living. The things that some people tell us that we've done without, I never missed. And I always enjoyed the ability to rove and enjoy the woods when I was a boy. And I still like the quietness now as a man.
I was just thinking whenever he was talking about being from Caldwell Parish and how I was thinking about how we met. But whenever he was young and I was really young, I remember seeing him at the ballpark and thinking, that's a bad little boy. You know how you are. And then when we grew up, we were going to have a birthday in our community, and my mom suggested that I call him up and invite him, and I was like, oh no, I ain't. But I was really shy, and I never expected when we went to the birthday party that guess who was going to be there. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we ended up kind of meeting and started a friendship at first. And the very first date we had was unbroke horses on a wagon that my dad didn't know they were unbroke at the time, but yeah, we went horse riding and had some friends in the community. But then from there we just kind of, and we've been here, like he said, I've been also always had a Caldwell Parish address right down the road from him part of our life. But yeah, we're homegrown, both of us.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the ministry. Have you always been a minister? Tell us just about that.
I come to know the Lord at about 9 years old in Vacation Bible School. Of course, the churches here have always struggled with enough people. You know, sometimes you have a grandma teaching 3 kids. The church I grew up in was a little larger than that, but we still had grandmas teaching us. And there's 2 things I advise: never go to church with your relatives. They'll spank you. Second, they were school teachers, and they'll sure spank you. Mm-hmm. Or back then they would, and they were all over 70, which makes it that much worse. They expected you to sit still and listen. And it didn't mean anything to me. The thing that I liked best was, of course, the refreshments. Kool-Aid and cookies was the thing at that time. But as soon as we got out, we would run around the church and jump the tombstones. It was kind of like a track for us. And we had cousins and all there, really enjoyed that. It didn't mean much to me. They would show us slides of missionaries in foreign countries, and I always loved to see those pictures and hear those missionary stories. And I thought I'd want to travel or something. Didn't really sense anything toward a missionary, but several months later, the words of those grandmas who were teaching us began to take heed in my heart. And I began to feel the conviction and spirit of the Lord, and I responded one night. I was too scared to go to the front. So I just prayed where I was as a little boy, come up to the second row to make it easier, because I'd been thinking about that for weeks before I came, but couldn't do it. And I stood right there and prayed by myself, just the way they had taught us in Bible school. But as we began dating and all, her daddy was pretty strict. He wouldn't let her go nowhere. She was already 14. I was 15. You'd think they would have been a little bit more lenient, but no. The only places they'd let us go was to church and stuff like that. So we'd go to church together, and her daddy taught Sunday school. Well, she'd go to bed at night and leave me sitting in there, and he'd teach me Sunday school about the next 2 hours.
Stayed up too late.
And that would go on for a year, but the Lord began laying a foundation in me, and it was stirring an interest. But at the end of all of that, God began to work through just a serious everyday life events. You know, we'd go swimming, somebody nearly drowned. Suddenly, that swimming part became a God encounter. We'd end up in the woods at night, a conversation about coon hunting would get so deep. And he began to lay some things in my heart, and eventually I realized he was calling me, but I thought, but he means when I get grown. I'm 50 now and still wonder what I'm going to do when I get grown up. But at that time, he was speaking to my heart, and I thought, well, when I get grown, I had some dreams and different things that would take a long time to tell. But I remember one night I woke up sweating profusely, and I was so disturbed, and the dream was pretty horrifying to me, but I wasn't harmed in it. Other people were being harmed. And it was a dream about hell. And I can't explain all I saw, but I remember I responded that night to what I saw in that dream, and I knew that if I didn't, then people would perish.
This was actually my mom's growing up, some of her growing up ages was in this community, but he was talking about Vacation Bible School and how he felt about the pictures he saw. And we had an aunt in the church where I attended out in Holum that she led Vacation Bible School, and in those days they had little books that they would read the missionary stories out of, and she always made sure to read the missionary stories at the beginning of Bible school, and I think that's where I started thinking about. And I think I remember later, whenever songs about being sent would be sung, I would kind of start praying, please God, don't send me. Because it was scary. You know, it's a scary thought to go off away from your family. And I was just little bitty at that time. But at 6 years old, I made a walk, you know, went down the aisle and was baptized, but I didn't even remember being baptized. And I think we were dating for a couple of years, and God started convicting me about salvation for the first time ever, like in that way. I mean, I'd never been under conviction like that to be saved. At the young age, I think I was just following other kids and emotional, and I started getting really, you know, like serious. Get out on the river and be scared I was going to fall in and, you know, and go to hell. And so, and we'd been dating and going to church all this time, and as we moved closer to the front, you know, you get more and more thoughts. And as the preacher preached every Sunday, I had a lot of serious thoughts. And but people were beginning to call Shane Preacher Man, and his best friend was one of them. And I played softball at the time, and I was about to leave softball practice, and his friend came up and said something about him being Preacher Man. And when he did, I laughed about it. And when I laughed, I said, yeah, I don't mind him being a deacon or something, but not no preacher.
Well, how many mission trips have you been on? I know you've been on several. How many
We
have
were
you
wondering.
There's no way to
can't
even
count.
remember
Yeah.
them. Yes,
We can tell you how many countries.
There you go. How
But-
many countries have you been
I
to?
think we figured, what, 9? I think it
we've
was
preached
about
in at
9.
least 9, and some we're able to tell, and others are restricted.
Yeah.
And we have friends there that, well, you have to be careful sometime, and it's not necessarily government persecution, but just the communities or neighborhoods that they live in.
What did you learn about the people, the church, the Christian community in the areas where you serve that you were able to bring back home with you?
Some communities, they were very fond and appreciative of the churches. In other places, they found the church to be just a burden. They couldn't see any reason, and really it depended on how the church members responded to the community. There's always some people that are takers, and there are other people that are givers. And sometimes we all have an ego, and people collect something. Some people collect money, other people collect land, some people collect animals, some people collect women, or, you know, it'd be like that, whatever it is. But whatever it is you collect, you never get enough. And churches can also have a personality, they collect people. And there can be the tendency just to use people, just to get, let me baptize you, let's get you that number one time. And we're more concerned with the head count, 1, 2, 3, not necessarily if you stay, it's just for whatever your goal is, because some churches score baptism like a game. That's a goal. That's a goal. And when the game's over, it's completely finished, and other churches do care for their people. But you could find that, and it could be in the United States like that. We've worked everywhere from the Indian reservations to neighborhoods in New York City. And I've seen the same appreciation in New York City in certain neighborhoods as I have seen on the Indian reservations or right here in Caldwell Parish. When we were in Ukraine, we never had as much as, we never were able to hang a sign. We had one, a brother, I was a Chinese brother, he was able to put a very small sign for a short time on one, but they kept us moving so much. And they didn't move us because of government persecution, it was because of cultural. Their culture was Russian Orthodox. We came in with a foreign religion. They didn't know the difference in a Baptist and a Presbyterian or a Baptist and a Catholic, but the religion that they knew of was Russian Orthodox. But in the village we were in, there was no Bible. As far as we know, when we first got there was not a single village. It was over 500 residents, and no one had a Bible, but they knew a Pentecostal lady that she would visit there sometime, and they would call her Bible woman, and she would bring it. I remember we tried to, when we went there to live, we tried to live modestly. We got a house like they lived in. We bought one from them. And this was one of the things, I'd like to read this verse maybe before I explain the rest of that. But in Ezekiel, you know, always with missions, we're used to people, oh, they want to hear, they're starving to death. The Ukrainians weren't like that. So almost everything we had been told, it wasn't, we come to realize, oh, this is not them. And I couldn't understand them at first. And there was a scripture that come into my mind in Ezekiel 3:15. The Bible says, this was Ezekiel's mind too. Then I went to them of the captivity at Tel Aviv that dwelt by the river Chebar, and I sat where they sat. I sat where they sat was what struck in my mind. It doesn't mean that much. But you don't understand people until you sit where they sit, you eat what they eat, you sing what they sing, you hear what they hear, you smell what they smell. You can't come in as a foreigner and feel them.
How long were you there?
Well, I went ahead with another young man to prepare a home for Marilyn and the kids that they were coming. We were there about 6 years total.
Okay.
And those first 6 weeks for me was, oh God.
What do you have there in your hand, Marilyn? What?
I was just, I was just thinking about, he was talking about that we were talking about the alcoholism and the different things that cause them to die, and then some things that just cause them not to be able to take care of their kids. But this little boy, when we first come to Ukraine, we had a sand pile out in front of our house, just working on different things at the house, and this little boy kept showing up in the sandbox, and he was probably less, this was after he got a little older. He was about 4, and no parent, no adult anywhere around, and we couldn't figure out who is this little boy, you know.
We just started calling him Sandman. We didn't know his name.
Yeah, come to find out, he was with his grandmother, but she was an alcoholic too, and so he was just left alone all day. And so he started gradually coming into the house, and you know, we took up time whenever he was little, and then when we had camps, we'd try to get him to come to camps, but he was just so used to roaming the village that he wouldn't stay. But eventually he got put in the orphanage, and the orphanage, that's what I was looking at with these, is where we would go and work. Mary and Caleb loved to go with the kids to the orphanage because Caleb spent a lot of time with the little village kids, and a lot of them, like I said, ended up in the orphanage. But at first we were working with the kids in the orphanage more, and he told us one day, he said, "Mommy, y'all haven't even noticed that the kids in the village are not as well off as the ones in the orphanage, because they would have hardship worse, because once they got put in the orphanage, they were actually better off because somebody was bringing them things and taking care of them, and American gifts were being given, but we would take them gifts at Christmas time, and you wouldn't believe how excited over little bitty, you know, things that here kids would just kick it aside, you know. Or
what part of missionary work have you enjoyed the most?
I think making the relationships
Yeah.
would be, you would think that I would say as a preacher, seeing them come to Christ.
What advice, do you have any advice that you would give someone who'd want to go into a missionary field? Any words of wisdom?
Don't over prepare.
yeah,
I think I have talked to several people and they spend years preparing.
yeah, that's true.
Usually they spend more time preparing than they are actually in the country.
We just thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing all your stories and just your wisdom, and we appreciate it. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting.